Something I've always loved about classic Ben 10 is the wide variety of unique and out there characters with mysterious origins. At the beginning of the series, we meet an energy-sucking vampire, along with his henchmen who each have their own unexplained superhuman abilities, as well as a mysterious group of knights looking to protect the Earth from aliens, as well as a god of death. In classic series especially, you just never know what's about to come around the corner. There's so much variety to the characters, it feels like there's an established universe with just all sorts of oddities to be discovered. It feels comparable to any established major comic book universe. You have people who are mutants, or the result of an experiment gone wrong, or a character with a mystical artifact, or whatever really. There's just so many different ways to go about expanding where they came from. Even characters who don't really get much backstory give you enough to the point where you just want to see more, you just can't help but imagine it. Like what we see from Gator Boy and Porcupine, we'll touch on those two later. While the major focus on Ben 10 in general is aliens, not everything could be explained away being of alien origin, especially in the classic series. Then we get to Ben 10 Alien Force, where we're given an explanation for just about anyone who has any special abilities or out of the ordinary appearance. At the time, it was a really fun addition. It made total sense as to what we'd seen so far, having all these unexplained mysterious powers be a result of alien hybrids. It worked for the series in general, especially the direction they were taking Gwen's new Anodite abilities, and obviously what they ended up doing with characters like Kevin's father, Devon. This worked especially well for characters like Manny and Helen, who were visually indistinguishable from the alien species they were explained to be hybrids of. But having them, along with every other superhuman we see, be implied to be alien hybrids just took something away from me that really was there in Classic. There was such an appeal to having all sorts of oddbods in the series, all having their own unique backstories and identities behind their abilities. In Alien Force, when we're introduced to characters like Michael Morningstar, there's no longer a mystery to their origins beyond which species they belong to besides human, which is a fun little thing to think of, especially with Michael Morningstar and characters like Zombozo both needing to drain other people of their energy. It's kind of interesting. And by the time we get to Omniverse, we get a hard course correction with this, learning that the Amalgam Kids are actually a result of Kevin's mutation and not alien hybrids. Returning to that idea that not everything is so easily explainable, reintroducing the idea that people of Earth can have out there and unique abilities, Kevin being the main example. The way I see it, mutants can be divided into a few categories in Ben 10. You've got mutants born with their abilities or natural born mutants, like we see from characters like Kevin and presumably Devlin in the classic future timeline. Devon, who not only inherits his father's abilities but also retains his first amalgam form. I suppose you could say this is some evolution on that ability. Reminds me a bit of Quirk evolution from My Hero Academia. That idea of shared lineage is especially interesting when you have characters like Porcupine, who functionally has the same abilities as Pierce, who is an amalgam using Argent's DNA. The others we see who fall into this category are Cooper with the ability to manipulate machinery with his mind, Zombozo the energy vampire, as well as Zombozo's henchmen Acid Breath, Thumbskull and Frightwig, who all have their own unique abilities. Acid Breath being relatively self-explanatory from the name, Thumbskull having superhuman strength, and Frightwig having the ability to manipulate her hair in all kinds of ways. Then we have Michael Morningstar and Clancy. Clancy having the ability to control insects and later transforms into one. We've got the criminally underused Gator Boy and Porcupine, who are both naturally born mutants. These two are actually confirmed to be natural-born mutants and not amalgams by Derek J. White on Twitter. That brings me to my next category, amalgams or artificially created mutants. This includes all members of the Amalgam Kids, all of whom were created by Cervantes using Kevin's ability to absorb DNA in order to alter their DNA. These include Helen, who's fused with the accelerated species, Manny, who's fused with one of four-arm species, Pierce with Argent, pretty self-explanatory there. Pierce is a bit of an interesting one. I always assumed prior to Omniverse that Pierce was in some way related to Porcupine. I originally thought he was Porcupine when Alien Force first aired. And Alan, who's fused with one of Heatblast species, although his hybridization's a little bit unique. With the Amalgam Kids, it's interesting the different ways these hybrid forms work. Manny and Helen being almost identical to the species they're crossed with, Pierce only having a few features, and Alan, like Devlin, able to switch between his human form and amalgam form. I guess you could sort of pair those two in their own subcategory. Speaking of, the rooters themselves have their own unique partial transformations, more closely resembling the aliens they're mixed with, while maintaining a more humanoid anatomy. Feels quite intentional on their part. I suppose you could argue that maybe Cervantes trialled the Amalgam Kids and realised how to refine it and make it more consistent from himself and the other rooters. These transformations include Cervantes himself, who has the DNA of one of Brainstorm species, Swift, who has the DNA of Jetray, really great design, Leander with the DNA of one of NRG's people, a bit of an interesting one here, having the same look that Pandor's armour has. Seems a bit strange, but I suppose Kevin's able to absorb raw materials, maybe they use that ability to craft a suit for him. There's also Phil, but his new form was a result of the Nematrix, not Kevin. I just wanted to group him here with the other rooters. All of the amalgams or artificial mutants go through the same similar process, splicing their DNA with an alien's in order to gain new abilities, whether that be Kevin or the Nematrix. Speaking of the Nematrix, there's an entire species of mutants created by the Omnitrix. During the events of Alien Force, Ben uses the Omnitrix to reconstruct the DNA of most every single one of the hybrid, mixing them with the DNA of whatever aliens are in the codon stream, giving them enough genetic diversity to continue as a species. So I suppose you could argue that most all hybrids are this style of artificial mutant. In a similar vein, we have the artificial mutants created by Dr. Animo. Obviously you have animals with altered DNA, that's Animo's whole thing, but Animo also splices animals with alien DNA as well as Grandpa Max, albeit temporarily. as well as creating a freakish hybrid between the species of stinkfly and ditto. I've always presumed there was some sort of animal base to this creature, but researching mutants for this video made me realise it doesn't. Up next we have Dr. Psychobos' Waybads, another artificial mutant species created by a mad scientist. Created by Dr. Psychobos from the DNA of Toku stars. There's not a lot to them, they're a feral version of Waybig with a more spooky design and swapped colour palette. I really personally love their addition to the series, they really just add a grandness to Omniverse. And then we have our final category of artificial mutants with the sentient ultimates. I've covered all the ultimates in a recent video, but I think they're worth a mention, each being a unique version of their species with a unique appearance and abilities, wildly more powerful than the others of the same species. And lastly we have the outliers, characters who are absolutely mutants but I wasn't able to fit them neatly into one category or the other. First off we have Ragnarok, a former member of the Rooters with unknown origins. From that and his somewhat mutant appearance, I'd bet that he's likely an artificial mutant, seeing as the other Rooters all were. The trouble with Ragnarok as well as our next character is that everything we see from his backstory was a false memory planted by Cervantes. And then the other false memory, Devon. By all means, he should be a naturally occurring mutant with the same abilities as Kevin, but unless I'm mistaken, Devon never existed and was just a false memory planted by Cervantes as well. Although there is a photo of Kevin as a child with Devon, but I suppose this could be faked. And then finally we've got one of my favourite characters in the series, Agrigor. Either believing himself to be an Osmosian as we understood it in Alien Force, or just using that as a backstory to trick Kevin and the others. Thankfully, Derek J. White confirmed that Agrigor was a lab experiment. I suppose he'd be a successful attempt to recreate Kevin as a backup. A bit of a behind the scenes here regarding Derek's original idea for Agrigor returning in Omniverse. I know a lot of people have been asking about Agrigor, so I'm going to use this question to explain my original idea for him. Before we started the Rooters, when I was first starting to think about this concept, I had the thought that we'd kick off the arc by having Agrigor seek out Kevin. Agrigor's genetic material was starting to break down. He was degrading to the point it was difficult for him to hold his human form. So he'd go to Kevin for help, ultimately disclosing to Kevin that Agrigor was a Rooter experiment to duplicate Kevin's powers. Perhaps Agrigor's mind was wiped as well. This episode would have likely ended with Agrigor melting into ooze, and Kevin would end up pretty much where he did at the end of the first Rooters episode. Overall, I love the reintroduction of mutants. It feels a little bit messy with Omniverse's course correction, but I'm happy with the return to form. Despite that, I really do enjoy what they were going for with Omniverse, with more alien theming than for everything. I'm sure I've misremembered some details here, and I'm pretty sure some people may disagree with my conclusions. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching.